Okay, so this one, yeah, phone's fine right there. So this one is going to be about homebrew, and specifically designing items, like items and feats, more items, but basically, like a few of the different ways I like to go about it, what I like to keep in mind. So I guess this one is a little more homebrew philosophy, I guess. So I always find it's easier to homebrew items for individual characters for a lot of reasons. One, you know that player, you know what they do, you know what the character does, you know what the rest of the character or the rest of the party does. So because you have all those parameters already met, it's a lot easier to figure out what that character will find useful and what and you already kind of know what would be a little too much. Whereas if you're designing in a vacuum and you don't know who's going to theoretically use this item, it's a little more up in the air, right? Dog's barking. As always. As soon as I start doing something, she starts barking. Lovely, shut up. It's nothing to bark at. So, for example, in the little Friday night game that I'm running, I've been designing some homebrew items for everybody. And including, for the one character, the Paladin, I made a little fire greatsword. And the way I designed this, it does an extra d6 fire damage. That's a decent amount of damage. I might up it, actually. But it does a good chunk of damage. And it's got some other little properties, like it's got, what else does it have? Oh, it sheds light. You know, that's kind of a whatever feature. But it also can just ignite readily ignitable objects, things like torches, bonfires, prepared things that aren't being worn or carried. So you can just ignite everything around you if it's, quote, like a torch or whatever. And the main reason I designed this, and the few things to keep in mind for this item in particular are, one, what that character does, the intended character for this item. And there's ways you can kind of brute force that, like, say, you feel drawn to this item and anybody else that touches it, like the item repels them or something, like basically make it extremely clear, literally no one else can use this. But I did make it you can only attune to it if you follow a fire deity or something. Did I make it? I don't know. But either way, that's one solution if you want that item to only be usable by a single character. But I didn't design it that way, excluding that attunement thing. Instead, I made it considering, okay, this character may not want to use it, so what would happen if all the other characters got it? I considered giving it the finesse property in case the rogue wanted it, but I don't think they will. Instead, I'm giving them a different item. They'll get something else cool that makes more sense for their character. I mean, like a flaming greatsword isn't always fucking cool. But, and then also the two-weapon fighting fighter might also want it because they've been looking for sources of fire. So, those are some considerations. Those two characters are likely to use it. Now, one, it doesn't fit, quote, it doesn't fit their fighting style, so there's that. It's also a sword. They don't seem to like swords. They want hammers. So I've given them, they're going to find some other stuff. But other than that, there isn't a whole lot. If that fighter got it, wouldn't be an issue. But really, the way I designed it, is that it's going to be one of two modes, essentially, so that this paladin can kind of change up their tactics depending on what they want to do. Like, if they need more damage, they'll use the greatsword. And in fact, I'm actually going to give that, like, later on, this greatsword will probably get, like, they'll either get an extra spell known from it, or a free casting of said spell. I'm not sure. Or, well, effectively both. But, you know, they might do something like that. I'm undecided. But regardless, that won't happen right away. When they find the sword, which is essentially right away, next session, it won't have that property, but it'll get it later on, I think. Or no, a different item that character was going to get this. So, never mind. But anyway, so this greatsword would be like what they draw if they want to be a little more offensive. But it's a greatsword, so they have to put down their shield. So I wanted to make sure that, you know, the damage for the great two-handed weapon is worth it. So that's why it does like an extra d6. Might do a little more. Probably not, though. I don't want their damage to get too crazy. I say as I'm thinking about what else I'm going to give this fighter. But like, I could design that weapon to be more. Because taking the party into account, it's easier. You know where the limits are, exactly what you want. But you know, there's a lot of things you have to consider. So, like, for example, if I were, let's take another character of mine, and let's design something for him. And now, I'll probably share this in my Curse of Strahd group where I'm playing this fighter or barbarian, this character, but. If the DM watches this and they like the ideas behind it, feel free to take them. But don't take what I say in this video as like, you know, this is what needs to happen with the weapon or anything like that. They're just ideas. I'm spitballing. So, I've talked about this character plenty of times before, but this character is a barbarian. And he's an executioner of the Raven Queen, so goddess of death, blah, blah, blah. Professional executioner. His main weapon is a scythe. So let's figure out a new feature for this scythe. Now, for an executioner weapon, what are some cool properties for an executioner's weapon? Giving it a little bit of thought, but first off, a really powerful feature you could give it is like the Vorpal sword's properties, where on a critical hit it just kills whatever you're targeting, unless it's like doesn't have a head, has too many heads, decapitating it wouldn't kill it, or is like a boss. Like, it specifically calls out legendary resistances as something, or as a reason to resist the instant death effect of this weapon. And then it just does a big chunk of extra slashing damage, which is still pretty strong. It does like an extra 6d8 slashing damage or something, which is a lot for free. But so it does that. Now that I think would make a lot of sense for an executioner's weapon. But it's still just tied to only critical hits. And those don't happen all that often, even with, like, you know, it's hearsay, or it's anecdotal, but our last session was almost, it was like big half-session combat. We fought, you know, one of the main, like, we're almost done in Barovia, and we fought like a mini-boss type thing, type character. But, I think there was like 4 or 5 rounds to that combat, and I attacked twice each round. I didn't get attacking at advantage. I didn't have one crit. And that's just how it is sometimes. Like, you just don't crit, even with advantage. But I think, like, 2 of the other characters that weren't attacking with advantage, they landed crits. It's just, you know, it's literally up to the dice. You can't guarantee it, so having a really dramatic effect like the Vorpal Sword's decapitation on a crit, it sounds cool and it feels cool when it happens, but it doesn't always happen and there's no real way to guarantee it, you know? So there's some considerations for that effect by itself. Now another property would be something like, when I think executioner, you know, you think the condemned person is like kneeling down, blah, blah, blah. However, your choice of execution is going to happen, like, you know, beheading someone with an axe or whatever. But another idea could be if the target is prone, then you automatically crit if you hit with this weapon. Makes enough sense, and it would then, but then that would have the effect of all I ever do with this character is try to shove people, shove them over, and then attack them. So my first attack is always like a shove. Or I have someone else try to shove them. And then just attack them for a free crit. That's like, and if I were always doing that, that would actually be relatively weak, because if every turn, even if I successfully knock them prone, every turn I'm giving up one of my attacks to knock him prone. So, and then an automatic crit would happen next turn, but then I would also be able to avoid needing the reckless attack, because knocking them prone I would get advantage, blah blah blah. So then theoretically what I would probably do is first attack would go to shove them. And then if it works, second attack would be a crit. But what I would most likely do in that case is pick up the Great Weapon Master feat, which is, I might do anyway at some point, but pick up the Great Weapon Master feat and friggin' then like, okay, second attack hits, that's a crit, that means I get a bonus action attack. That also crits. So then I get my attack back effectively if that were a property that this weapon had. So there's ways to, like, I can already figure out a way to build around that property. Another idea is to give it an increased crit range. That's probably the most boring, but is also the safest, you know? Like, you know, increased crit range is cool. It's simple. It's not all that powerful. Like, especially if it's an increased crit range of 1, but it does tie into, like, the brutal critical that the barbarian would have and blah, blah, blah. That would, obviously, I think that would be the safest choice. Or you can give this character something like a ranged attack with this weapon, where, like, maybe, you know, you can have all sorts of caveats, like maybe you don't technically take the attack action with this. So, one, you can't use reckless attack. It's just like a special thing this weapon can do. And, like, say, who knows, maybe it can, like, attack through friggin', you know, you send out a blade wave or open up a little portal and slash through with them from 60 feet away or whatever. I made, like, in my SCP game, I already made a weapon with this property it takes charges to do. So it's not crazy, but it's something. Especially in the SCP game, it's actually kind of meaningless because all those characters have guns. Throwing out some old rice. So, you know, that's not a super powerful thing, but on this character it theoretically could be. Like, allow him to make, like, a single powered up ranged attack with a weapon or something. And there's a lot of ways that could be done. You know, basically, like, give a single strike. Like, and there's a lot of different ways you could word it. Maybe it's not the attack action. Maybe it's, you can spend one of your attack actions to enhance to enhance your attack for the rest of this turn, for example. Like with any number of properties, like say increased critical range, increased range on your, like increased reach, you know, who knows, any number of things. But especially something that just increases damage is not necessary, because this character already does an average of 70 damage on their turn if both attacks hit, and he's got a plus 13 to hit and reckless attack, so he usually hits. So I think his average, factoring in brutal critical, which isn't a huge damage increase, and factoring in his massive attack bonus and reckless attack, I think his average damage on the turn is like 60, which is pretty on par, or it's way higher than like a barbarian at this level that is just using like a +1 weapon with Great Weapon Master. So there's that. But just like, those are some simple, like, you know, combat relevant properties that could be put onto this weapon. But other things might be like that, especially that executioner's property, like maybe like some more narrative features, like maybe creatures slain by this weapon can't be resurrected, something like that, which could potentially bite the party in the ass if this character is ever like dominated, and then I end up killing one of the other party members. They're just dead now because they've got the kill everybody forever scythe. Like, that's an idea which could be really cool, because then if his character gets dominated, suddenly it's a massive threat. Or like the scythe could be a target to be stolen, but that feels weird. Like, maybe this property only functions, like this weapon is designed for this character narratively, so then maybe that isn't really a thing. There's enough going on with this character and extra planar entities and all sorts of garbage. But something like that, like a more narrative focused property, like being able, like anything that's killed by this scythe doesn't resurrect, like I mentioned, or maybe it can open port, like this is how the party gets around, because the DM has mentioned that there is like the second half of the campaign, after we finish Barovia, is going to be like really plains hopping, like lots of planes walking and teleporting to different planes and doing that kind of shit. So maybe this scythe is one of the ways, like the scythe is a way that they can do it, so that they don't have to like just learn plane shift somehow. And instead, the barbarian does it for them. And like once a day, he can just effectively cast plane shift by cutting open a portal, and they walk through it. Like, that's a narrative idea, and it gives this character some narrative weight. But he's already got plenty of narrative weight, so that's not really necessary. But just like that idea to give that character something to do, or you know, you want to get real weird with it, like maybe the scythe gets some charges and it can spend the charges on, like, I don't know, sealing capabilities of the target. So like when you hit someone with the scythe, you can declare that you want to seal or sever something. Like, not like an arm or a leg, but like, you know, their sight, or you want to sever their ability to cast third level spells, or whatever it is you want to do, especially if you want to leave it up to interpretation every time. Like, just, it's labeled as you declare a thing, and then the DM interprets how many charges it'll take. That's something that's really easy to write now, or easy to will, quote, write immediately, and then you just have to figure it out as it comes up. And it's all up to player creativity, something like that. Could be cool, but again, those are just ideas. I think that's all I really wanted to say on this topic, which coincides with finishing the dishes. So